So this guide will be about how does your weapon attach to your character? How does it stay attached regardless of what you do? And how are we going to edit this with VFX Editor? Before I get into it, a little disclaimer. I'm not an expert at VFX Editor. What I'm going to talk about in this guide is just things I've discovered just by poking around. Um, so I'm making this guide because as far as I know, there isn't one yet for this specific type of edits. So I'm making it because people ask for it. Hopefully, someone who knows more than me just tackles this subject with more details. But yeah, in any case. So we're going to need VFX Editor. So you just open it. From you enable it in your Dynamite plugins. You open VFX Editor with /VFXEdit. And when we're here, we're going to go here and we're going to click on Atch, which is going to open a new window. And now we can close this VFX Editor window. We don't need it anymore. We just need our Atch Editor. So Atch seemingly stands for attach offsets, which is very literally what it is. It is the file that dictates where your weapons attach to your character and the offset from the point it is attached to. So we'll get to this. We'll get to the detail of this in a minute. So first we have to load an Atch and dictate like what we're replacing. This is not super complicated, so we click on the first looking glass and this opens this new window. We go into the character tab and there we have to indicate what race and gender we're going to work on. In my case, this is Mikote F. Select. Go. Now we can close this, and now that we have this here, so we have all this stuff that happened, all these weapons that have now appeared in this column. And this is the stuff that is part of this file and that we're going to edit. And then, so that's the file we're going to edit, and then we have to indicate what we're going to replace with this edited file, and that's basically itself. We're going to replace the vanilla file with the edited vanilla file that we're going to work on. Now, if you've worked with VFX Editor before, you're going to notice like we have a single file for this race. And an important thing, there's two important things to note with Atch mods, and this is the first, is that this is a single file that contains the data for all weapons. And what this means is that once you have this as a Penumbra mod or whatever, well, that you're going to install Penumbra or wherever, it's going to be incompatible with any other mod that also modify this specific file for this race. So let's say I create a mod that only modify Gunblade, and I have a separate mod that only modify the gun for Machinist. If I have both of these mods active in Penumbra, one of them is going to override the other. Like let's say there's a gun mod as the bigger priority, and so this is a mod where only the gun is edited, the rest is vanilla. It's going to overwrite the mod that is modifying the gun blade, and it's just going to restore it to vanilla, because on this one mod, I left the gun blade vanilla. I don't know if it's super clear, but the golden rule is like keep track of the fact that, again, so Atch mods are incompatible with each other if they modify the same race, and you may need to modify priority or whatever based on whatever job you're currently playing, or you may need to like manually fuse mod together, which I will go over a little later. But that's just an important thing to note. Like this is a single file. This is different from like, for instance, like when you're modifying an ability, like the ability has its own file. And you can modify this ability without really poking with anything else. This is not the case here. It's one file for each race and gender. So that's just important to note. So now we can click on one of these weapons. So in my case, I'm on Gunbreaker right now. So we can go on the Gunblade, and here we have stuff that appear. So we have the states. So this is a different states in which your weapon can be. So as far as I've found out, state 0 is your weapon when it is unsheathed. So like this. When your character is holding their weapon, this is state 0. We're going to mostly ignore state 0. Like you can I'm going to focus on when the weapon is sheathed, but everything I'm going to talk about, you can apply it to state 0. It's just unless you go a little wacky, there's fairly little reason to play with state 0, at least for main hand weapons. Certain offhands are their own items, and that can be a little interesting. I think I'll show a little example later of something I did with Paladin, with the Paladin shield, which is its own item. But yeah, like I'm going to mostly ignore this, but everything I'm going to talk about regarding state 1 can be applied to state 0. If you want to get a little wacky, because it's going to be a little weird to take your character's weapon away from their hand in combat, in their combat idle. So we're going to mostly talk about state 1. Because state 1 is your weapon when it is sheathed. And so here we have a few info. So first we have the bone the weapon is attached to, because your character is includes something called like an animation armature, which is like basically a skeleton that dictates how your character animates. And so how the game keeps track of where the weapon should be when it is sheathed is through this. So it is dictating here that it should be attached to Sebo, which I think is the torso, but essentially is the back for our purposes here. And R indicates the right, so it is attached to the right of the torso. And then we have an offset. So this is basically coordinates relative to the exact position of that bone. And then rotation is also like pretty straightforward. Now, there are two, and of course scales is exactly what it sounds like. It's the size of the weapon. Like if I change this and then I click update, so I can click update to see what we're currently doing. Please note just one thing to note. If you have Atch mods enabled in Penumbra, make sure to turn them off, because they're going to prevent us from seeing what the work we're previewing here in the Atch Editor. So again, make sure to turn off your Atch mods before starting editing, so we can click updates to see the change, and now the weapon is bigger. So this is pretty straightforward, the scale. I'm going to put it back to what it was. And again, at any point we can click update to see the effect of what we're doing. Now, the offset and rotation are going to be a little less straightforward, because it tends to like, what is this number basically? And well, the answer kind of depends on what bones you attach to. Now, and also depends on type of weapon, because some weapon will also behave differently. Yeah, based on the type of weapon, especially for weapons which are basically two weapons. So denser weapons and ninja weapons are basically one item in this. They are not a separate offhand like the Paladin Shield and the Red Mage Focus, which have their own entry in this. But for the denser chakrams and the ninja daggers, they're one item, and they're going to move together when you modify these numbers. Now, the main idea is that this number is up and down. So if I modify this, let's say I'm going to copy paste it, and then I want to just put it to 0. We update, and then it moved down. But it moved down. Let me actually double check like the angle in which it moves. Yeah, so it moved a bit in an angle. So that's what I mean when I say it's consistent, but also it's going to depend on what bone. Like the bone has an orientation of its own. So this first number moves up and down, but it moves up and down on this like slight diagonal. I'm going to put it back. And something here. So this moves the weapon. Second number moves the weapon kind of sides to sides. Again, at a slight angle here. Back. And finally, this last number moves it front and back. So something could be passed. And then add a number here. And now it is much further away. Restore it for now. Now rotation again. So this first number is going to move the weapon on this like circle. Imagine like a circle going around your character from the front and back. So let's say we modify this to like 2. And there we go. So now it's spinning like this, as if it was a circle around your character's front and back. In this case, because it's going to be a little different. Again, every time depending on like the bones, things like that. Then the second number is this is actually going to move the weapon on itself. Not going to really move away or back and forth. It's going to move on itself. Like it's going to rotate on itself. If we change this number, change it to 1, boom, then voilà, it started rotating on itself. I'm going to put it back. And then this last rotation number is going to rotate it this time on a circle that goes around our character's sides. Now, one thing I can actually, there's a very cool trick with this last number that I'm going to demonstrate on a different job, in fact, on a warrior. So, as you can see, I have put a sword on my warrior. So you can use text tool item conversion feature to move weapons around between jobs. So here I put a sword on my warrior, except, well, it's not exactly pointing the right way when it is seated. That's kind of an issue, but as it turns out, we can fix this if we go to Great Axe, state 1, which is our sheathed state. And so we have our last rotation number, and you may notice this is the same number as it was for the gunblade, except it's minus. And so here's a cool trick for weapon, especially like weapon you have on the back, on the hip. You're always going to find this number. It's 1.571. This is like the diagonal angle at which the weapon is kept. And literally all we can do is reverse this number by either removing or adding the minus symbol, and then we update. And okay, well, we need a little more, but it is not pointing in the right direction. We need a bit more like change to the other number. But just by changing this minus symbol, you can have the correct orientation for the diagonal of the weapon. So that's a cool little trick here. Okay, so I've talked about the numbers. We can also talk about the bone. So I'm going to go back to gunblade. Let's say I want my gunblade not on the back, but I actually want it on the hip. So we can do that. We can change the bone the weapon is attached to. So we're going to replace Sibo here, which Gussie, which is the waist. And we keep the R for the right for now, just to demonstrate. And there we go, it's on my art. Now my character is a bit thick, so it's... And also we probably need to adjust the number. Now a good tip is also you can just steal stuff. So I'm going to first put it on the left hip. So we change R for left. Yeah, that's already better. Because that's more of a direct equivalence, I think, to our previous position. Okay, it's already pretty good, in fact. don't really need like I could like change the offset a little bit to put it a little further away. So I would change like this number, which is the side number, to put it a little further away. But it's already pretty good. And there you like it's on your app, and it follows your app. It's pretty important to like if you're going to really change where the weapon is, like for instance from the back to the hip, it is pretty useful to change the bone first. And the important reason why is because the weapon moves along the things it is attached. Like so, when the left hip moves, the weapon moves along with it. It's not super obvious, but like if you like keep the bone attached to the back, but you try to manually like move it pretty far away, it's going to look a little weird because it's still going to move when this part of the back moves if you leave it attached there. So changing the bone like that is pretty important. So Sebo and Kosi are going to be like your main friends, I think. When you want to move weapons around, like if you want to move it to the hip or you want to move it to the back. But so as I was saying, a thing you can do also is like you can just steal stuff from another weapon. Like I'm like, okay, I want to be sure like this is the right numbers. I can just go to the Paladin sword, which is I think the Paladin sword is like further down. Let me find it. Shield is here. Sword. So this sword is the Paladin sword. I could just take the numbers here, and just go put them on my gunblade. And in fact, yeah, this seemed to be the only different numbers, I think. So I could just like edit that. So yeah. And so that's the main idea behind it. Another cool thing you can do. So if you want to find out about like more bones, there are a few places where you can find like the names of the bones of the armature. I think in Anamnesis you can. In Blender, if you look at the vertex groups of a mesh, it's also going to tell you basically the names of the bones are going to be the names of the vertex groups. So yeah, but there are a few other notable ones. Like for example, we have Tate. Tate is the shield. So if I update, what is it? Oh no, okay, it didn't like that. So sometimes some weapon, I start going to like, no, I don't like being put there. And this is what happens if you mess up. So thankfully, it doesn't crash your game or anything. Your weapon is just going to fall to the ground the instant you move. This is fine. If you uncheat it go back to you. This is fine. This is just it's broken, but you know, better than a game crash. But again, it's like it's a good idea to just go check. So I'm going to go check the Paladin shield because it's possible I just messed up the name. Yeah, I did because it's N. So some bones start with N, some bones start with G. This is kind of like so the places where we reach the limit of my knowledge. I don't know why. I don't know why. Some bones start with N, some bones start with G. I do not know why. So yeah, so we can just again, it's a good thing to just go and steal to kind of figure out. So Tate is where your shield goes in unsheathed states. So it's a dedicated bone for that purpose. So it's hovering over your left arm. And I think there's also one, it's not used vanilla, but I think there's one on the right arm too. Yep. Not oriented the same way, but it's there too. And again, like I don't know, if you have a small weapon and you're like, oh, I want it to be like attached to my character's forearm, you could use that, for instance. So yeah, but yeah, I mean, if you want to play with more bones, it's a good idea to to check and find like the exact name because yeah, it can be a few things because starting later. You also want to have Bucky here. One thing of note is that for certain weapon here, it's going to say Bucky 2. I've tested it works. So if you leave it at like if you change weapon that are Bucky 2, as far as I've seen, they seem to only like be on Kosi from what I've tasted. But what you can do is also just, so we're going to go on denser. So I want to put denser on my back. If I just do Sabo here, from what I've tested before, it's not going to like it. There you go. It blends into the ground. But we can remove this tool here, and now it works. And as I've said before, so chakrams and ninja daggers are a single item. So they're going to move together. For instance, the second offset number, which is like the side number, this is essentially going to move them closer or further away from each other of the two weapons. So there you go. So if I increase the number, they go further away from each other. If I decrease it, they're going to get closer to each other. So things are a little different depending on the type of weapons, because all these numbers affect both weapons at the same time. Again, so like your imagination is kind of the limit here. You can do some pretty wacky things. So for instance, here we have, so we go to state 0, which is the unsheathed state. For basically every weapon, you're going to see the same thing, which is Buki, just Buki by itself, and then zeros everywhere. Because so your characters, so as I just said, we have the dedicated tate bone, which is served for the shield when it is unsheathed. But we also have Buki, and so Buki is the dedicated unsheathed weapon bone. So that's where your weapon goes when you unsheath it. By default, it's in your character palm, and then like if a combat animation needs to move your weapon, it's going to move this bone, which is so the Buki bone, which your weapon is attached to. But so like a wacky thing you can do, for instance, like you can take this bone, and you can just like put it on the samurai shield. Like that's something I tested, which worked. It looks a little wonky, but it worked to just assign the samurai shield, both in state 0 and in state 1, to Buki left. So to basically have my character just be holding the sheet at all time, to just kind of do this style, or like always holding the sheet in one hand. And it looked a little goofy, but it's a thing you can do. Anyway, but I'm just going to actually show one example, so we're not here all day. I also show another thing. So there's a little warning here. You may see it's unsupported. Basically, what it seems to mean, and from what I've tasted, is that you cannot, like, you can save your workspace, you can save like your work here, but you will not be able to load it back in the editor. Thankfully, there's an alternative that does exactly the same thing. Is that here, instead of loading Miko TF or the race we're working on, so we can just, instead of going into like this character tab in the game items, we can go into Penumbra, and we can literally load a mod that we have installed in Penumbra. So in case I'm going to load this. I'm going to click update. So now my denser weapon goes back where it was, because I've loaded a mod that only has the paladin weapon modified. So now I'm going to go on paladin, and there we go. And there, so what is this? So this is a shield that I've transformed into a sword with text tool, and then I have an edit that like change where the shield is resting. So the shield is, I put the shield on the back, which, to be fair, no, actually it's always on the back already when you just see it. But I've changed its location to kind of create this Geralt style shielding with double swords. And also, even more importantly, I've changed its state 0, so it's unseated state. I've moved it away from Tate, and I put it on Buki left. And the result is this. Is I have a paladin with double sword. So there you go. So you can be a little creative with this, and you can do things like that. And so the other thing, so that's useful with like the fact that you can load Penumbra mode is that you can just export your work as a mod to basically like save your work even if it's unfinished, and then you just install it in Penumbra and then you can load it back in the editor. Or you can take someone else mod and then you can just add another weapon if you want, or you can just edit what they've done to be a little more to your liking, stuff like that. And so finally, there's just a few more things I can show. I'm going to show how to export mod, and then I'm going to also make a very important note about Atch mod. So if we want to export what we've done, it's very simple. We have, okay, first, before we export actually, if you want, you can work on more than one race at a time. So you can just here, you can open another tab and then do the same thing. You can select like different race and work on this race instead, and then you can also like include it after if you want. So let's imagine we did some edits to LSNM2. Now we're going to export our mod. So we can export as Penumbra or text tool. I don't think this changes anything because we can install text tool mods into Penumbra. So personally, I like to export as text tool generally because it's more flexible. So this open this window, and here, so we have to not forget to include the mods we've been working on. So we have our Atch mods here. We can just select everything or just select one thing if we want. There's a pap mod here. That's something I'm going to talk about in a second. That's something I was like just double checking beforehand, and I'm going to show in a second. But yeah, make sure to include your mod, enter the name, everything, and then you export. Pretty simple. Now, there's an important thing to note. So the second thing to note about Atch mods, besides the fact that they're incompatible with each other, there's also the fact they're incompatible with Mare synchronous. So your Atch mod will not show true Mare synchronous. I want to be alright. So just so we're clear on that. So people will not see the edits you've done to how your weapon attached to a character. They will see combat animation. They will see anything that is categorized as an animation. Like this is an animation. This is an animation. Your weapon just hanging out on your character's back will not show through Mare synchronous. Like consider this like not an animation. It's its own like separate data, and it's data that is not picked up by Mare synchronous. Now, there's one last thing I can show that is a bit tangential to this, but can be useful. If you like, for instance, if you like, oh, well, I've changed, like I had a weapon on my hip, but now I've changed it to the back. And now the animation doesn't really work anymore. Like even here, you can see on Paladin, my Paladin is reaching for their hip when they're drawing, even though the weapon is on their back. Now, specifically for this, when we've changed between back and hip, we can fix this a little bit. Like we can reduce the jank. There's always going to be a little bit of jank in this regard, but we can sometimes help it. So what we can do is we're going to look at the file types here again, and we're going to open pap. So now in pap, so you can already see what I was double checking just before. So, but I'm going to show again. You can be like, okay, well, I've put the paladin sword that is normally on the hip to the back, and now I want my character to actually reach further back during the drawing animations. So this we can do. So what I want, I'm like, okay, I need my character to reach for the back, so I could take like Gunbreaker or something. That's a Gunbreaker, Dark Knight, like they're good. Yeah, the Gunbreaker, Dark Knight are a good choice in the case because they use swords and their sword is on their back. So we go here. So we go to the, when you go to select the file, we go to job. select the job, and under general, we have draw weapon. So we select this, which is already selected here. And then here for the file that's being replaced, we're not doing this, we want a job. And so we have Paladin, so we go to Paladin, and there we go. So this will replace the draw weapon animation with the gunbreaker one. In this case, this includes, in fact, we can update. This includes drawing the weapon. This includes also putting it back. Now, this is a basic drawing and sheeting animation. There's technically two more, and that's the emote, because in Endwalker, we got the draw and sheet emote, which are their own thing, with a little more flair. But so we can do the same thing. We can go find the emote we want. So we want the gunbreaker one. So here for the different race, if you don't see the race you're working on, you can just select bin leader, like, and race and gender. So like if you're Rogaden F and Wrofgar F, well, I don't know, Wrofgar F are not in the game yet. I don't know exactly what they're going to do with them. But yeah, Rogaden F, you just use Midlander. Lalafell F, you do use Lalafell M because they have very different body from the other races. But like outside of Lalafell, if your exact race and gender is not listed here, you just select Midlander M. So we take the draw weapon emote from Gunbreaker and we put it on the Paladin equivalent. So we go back to here to emote, draw, and Paladin, Midlander M. And we do the same thing for the seating. So we have also the seat emote, because here they're separate with the emotes. And here, this is a lot more specific. So in this case, I see there's Mikote F. So I might have to select that. We'll see what we have for Gunbreaker. Yeah, we have Mikote F for Gunbreaker, so I'll select this. And then I'm replacing Paladin. I make sure to be on seating. And here we also have Mikote F, so we're replacing Mikote F. And there we go. And then when I export, I can make sure to also include these edits. And there we go. That's really the main gist of it. I hope that was helpful. Really, this is something you're going to have like to poke around, try things, see what works, what doesn't. And yeah, so yeah, have fun with it.